Hello, 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 and welcome. So, if you don't know me, my name is Shashi Solluna, and I'm thrilled to be welcoming you here today to this topic about trauma training for Tantra professionals, why it's so important, also, how come it's not included, and what happens when we are not properly trained in trauma. So lots of big topics for tonight. I'd love to invite you, as Francis has already done, to head to the comments and just write where you are in the world so we can get a little bit of a sense of where everyone's tuning in from. So we've got Spain and Amsterdam. That's wonderful. Istanbul, Croatia, lots of Europeans. This is great. I will put mine as well. I am in Bali. Amazing. So keep those coming and we will move into this. So people are still arriving. So please put in the comments where you are in the world. And meanwhile, I want to introduce my guest here tonight, who is my co-teacher, someone I'm very fond of and love to teach together with. And for some of you, you have met him before. His name is John Skelton Pearson. And something that's very special about this man is that he is a psychotherapist and very, very deep into the psychology and psychotherapy of healing and transformation. But he's also a very well-practiced yogi and tantric master, many years of studying these paths as well. And like me, loves to blend these two together. So together we have been working with bringing trauma training for Tantra professionals, and we're going to talk about that tonight. So lovely to see you all. Let's welcome John. Welcome, welcome.
Hello, Shashi. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, very loud and clear. Very loud and clear.
Excellent. Good. Always good to have a lovely deep dive with you, my dear.
You too.
Yeah.
You too. So I think what would be really good is if we both share a little bit about why we felt this training was important. So we've both been quite a lot in the spiritual scene. So, you know, including meditation, enlightenment, yoga, the more classical practices, as well as Tantra. And both of us are also very deep into psychology. So let's talk a little bit about like why we feel this is needed. Do you want to jump in there first?
I'll jump in. Okay. Oh, what shall I say? Well, I think in the first place, a lot of people operate on a very limited definition of what tantra, what trauma, that too, but that's another rabbit hole. A very limited idea of what trauma actually is. You know, we tend to think of it as it's what happens with shock trauma. We're involved in a plane crash, somebody assaults us or whatever. But actually trauma, as Dan Siegel, who I know we both love, Shashi, defines it as any experience that we have, which is more that we can handle. And when it's more that we can handle, the brain fragments, it can't quite cope. And then we're in a state of disintegration. And that disintegration, I think, is not just what happens, for example, when we're in a tantric workshop and somebody starts freaking out, you know, and then we're kind of wondering what to do. But it's also when people freeze, it's what happens when people dissociate. It's what happens even when people feel uncertain about where they are and what they're doing and whether they have control over their own agency in a Tantra workshop. And
wow. Okay, let's
yeah,
slow things down because you are such an expert that you're throwing in all these big comments, and so I'm gonna pause you there and then go through some of these things so that those who are a
okay,
bit
let's
more
do
new to
that.
the field, because
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
such an
yeah.
expert, you've just piled it all in.
Yeah, I just jump
So
in. Yeah.
so for those that are newer to it, um, Yeah, what John is sharing here is about all the different ways that trauma can affect people in a tantra workshop, and just naming a whole bunch of them. I want to just also add in that for myself, when I first learned tantra, so I was in the Osho ashram first, and then worked with many of the top tantra teachers. From everything I learned, there was a lot of focus on opening up. Like that felt like the purpose of Tantra, was like opening ourselves up. And that drew me into it as a British, Oxford graduate. I really longed to open up. But what I didn't realize early on is that opening up can re traumatize people, and needs to be done in a very specific way. And this was not covered in the early days of Tantra at all. So, Neo Tantra, just a little history for people, is like Neo Tantra was developed a lot by Osho in the 70s and the 80s. And there was so much catharsis and boundary breaking, and it was all about freedom and let's get naked and let's all self pleasure together, and like open, open, open. And people thought, well, this is the way towards freedom and liberation. And there's been a lot of fallout since those early days, and it takes a bit of time before people sort of come around and go, well, actually, I'm feeling quite traumatized by those workshop experiences. Or I opened up in the workshop, but then later I felt myself closing down. And then also there's sometimes a kind of false opening, which also you're indicating, when people feel like they're open, but it's not really integrated. So this is something that, right? This is something that I really experienced and still experience to this day, that many Tantra teachers are so focused on cracking people open, and they do not understand the mechanisms of truly allowing people to open up in a way that is integratable. And integration, what you and I are going to go into this today, integration, instead of having the goal of being as open as possible, we need to have the goal of being integrated. Because openness can leave people feeling like, as you said, fragmented. They can be confused. They can lose their sense of boundaries. So you mentioned, like, for example, dissociation, which is where people look like they're open, their eyes are rolling and they're shaking, but they're not embodied. So that's a really huge piece. And so it's really important that Tantra teachers don't only learn all these methods and these techniques of cracking people open, but actually that they learn what are the methods of really genuinely helping participants to open in the way that allows them to integrate the experience. So when they leave the workshop, they're actually in a really harmonious, coherent, and balanced place.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I'm in total agreement with that. And I think what you're addressing there is a potential failure to read the room. When a facilitator goes in to do a tantric workshop, and I remember when I first started facilitating workshops, I had an idea of my own agenda. And this was a way of managing my own trauma, which in this sense was my own lack of belief in my ability to actually run a workshop in a successful manner. So what I do is I go in with an agenda, and because I was so focused on my agenda, opening people up, as you say, I would fail to read the room. So I would fail
Yes.
to actually take into account what was going on. And I think total mastery of facilitation is having the confidence to be able to go in there with an open mind and an open heart and be able to see who's walled off, who's boundaryless, how is this going? What is the most optimum thing that I can do right now to ensure that the field feels safe enough to take a risk and to move onwards? And that's really what we're looking at, isn't it? Safety.
Yeah, safety. And something there that you mentioned is like, I feel you mentioned about maturity of facilitations. I feel like less experienced facilitators, it's a little bit about more about them than about the participants. It's like, can I be the facilitator that gives everybody, the most orgasmic, biggest, experience possible, which is really about the ego of the facilitator wanting to be impressive, instead of how do I serve the room? What is best for this space, and
Mhm.
watching for the lowest common denominator, as in, like, who in this space is the most frightened right now and the most contracted, and how can I facilitate in a way that is keeping them safe, as well as allowing everyone to have the opening experience. And you mentioned how the bottom line is safety, and I often say Tantra is safe to be wild. It's
Yeah.
safe to be cracked open, because we're not the same as trauma therapists who are just down regulating and bringing safety and calm. That's why most trauma trainings are not so helpful for a Tantra teacher, because many trauma trainings are just helping someone integrate a previous trauma and clear anxiety and fear and feel safe and grounded, which is a wonderful thing. But as Tantra teachers, we're actually activating people. We're getting that kundalini, we're getting that orgasmic energy, we're giving people the opportunity to go to their edge. And so we actually need to learn to bring these two polarized pieces together of safety and wildness in exactly the right combination, the right timing, and the right order, so that everyone in the space can have that experience of opening that they came here for, without any damage happening along the way. That's our ultimate aim, right, as a Tantra teacher.
Absolutely. And what you're addressing there is the idea of attuning to the people in the room. And I believe, and of course, we have a lot of this going on in the Tantra training that we're running. It's all the difference between me power, what I call me power, and I power. Me power is when I am looking to get the energy of the group or the person that I'm working with, maybe as a tantric body worker. I'm getting them to like me. I'm getting them to kind of hold me in high
Mhm.
regard. I'm not radiating something out. I radiate something out when I'm in what I call I power. When I'm in my I power, I do spontaneously the thing that needs to be done, like you say, in order to bring up the lowest common denominator into the fold, so that everybody can be safe enough to be wild enough together, you know.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I think this is ultimately anarchy. And a lot of people go, no, anarchy, it's a terrible thing. And actually, anarchy is not nihilism, right? Anarchy in the UK, Sex Pistols, destroy. It was never that. When the early writers started writing about anarchy, they said when everybody is kind of in their own dharma, when they are in their own center, and I'm working in my center and you're working in your center, and these other 20 people are working in their center, we're all functioning as one cohesive and
Mm.
harmonious whole. To the extent that somebody is out of alignment, that whole will be less harmonious. So what we're
Yeah.
looking for is the harmoniousness of the whole. And the only way we can really do that, to my mind, is by being integrated within ourselves. And maybe a
Mhm.
bit later on we can talk about what integration is for
Mhm.
us, because I think there are
Yeah.
specific ways of addressing that. But when you
Yeah.
to the extent that we are aligned in and of ourselves, we can be attuned to others. And when we do that, we diminish the potential for traumatic uprisings to occur in the field.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting you mentioned about, like, how important it is to be integrated in ourselves. A couple of things spring to mind. One is that just very recently I went to a tantric event, like a temple night tantra event. The
Mhm.
minute I walked in the space, I could feel that the space holder basically couldn't hold themselves. There was
Yeah.
like nervous laughter. They weren't deeply present. They were kind of all over the place. When it came to setting boundaries and agreements, they came up with like two, and then they were like, anything else, anyone, anything else? And somebody said, well, what are the boundaries for this event? And they were like, oh, whatever, you can do whatever you want. Like so many ways of just leaving it unheld and unsafe. And, like basically the reading that I got was, this is someone who hasn't done enough integration and enough healing. Another person who just calls himself a Tantra teacher, probably never done a teacher training. And even many Tantra teacher trainings don't include trauma awareness, but at least there's a more experienced facilitator who can monitor if you're ready or not to guide others. And unfortunately, because the world of Tantra is not that well regulated, too many facilitators never did a training. And here's the mistake I see them making. They look at the methods and they go, oh, I can do that. It's just eye gazing, a bit of touch, a bit of that. And they simply they go to a few workshops, they see the methods, and then they regurgitate it. They call themselves a Tantra teacher and they copy the methods. What they're doing is just learning the content and delivering content. What they are missing is they're not looking at the container. Are they ready to be a container for people to have a deep tantric experience? And on that, I just want to add that when I trained in the Osho ashram as an Osho therapist, before we could even start facilitating, we did a week or more of self-observation as a space holder. So someone would come and share their issue. We would just sit and notice, am I contracting? Am I expanding? Am I comfortable? Am I uncomfortable? And we were holding space for ourselves before we would even start to guide the client, the other person. And I learned on that training that the first person you need to hold space for is yourself. And that is not only in the moment of the Tantra workshop, but you need to have done enough integration work that you can hold space for yourself and others. So this, I'd say, is one of the biggest mistakes that people make, is thinking teaching Tantra is just about copying methods.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Anyone
Absolutely.
can copy a method. I mean, you could look online and get 1 million tantric meditations. You could even ask ChatGPT, but that's not going to make you a Tantra teacher, because you haven't done enough yourself to be that space holder.
I think it's all the difference between getting up on a stage and reading Shakespeare lines out like they're kind of like you read out a telephone directory, if you remember the days of telephone directories. Anyway, all the difference between doing that and actually like putting some feeling into it. You can go through the motions, but you're not reading the room, you're not attuning. And
exactly.
Attunement is 99% of facilitation, I think.
Yeah, I felt with this facilitator last week, I thought they don't even know that they're not holding space, because I assume they never did a training, because otherwise the facilitator would have given them feedback and let them know that they're not ready yet. And so there are lots of well-meaning people calling themselves a Tantra teacher, but well-meaning is not enough. You have to actually have the training skills, because this is very deep work. You're working with sexuality, emotions, sexual energy, intimacy. These are very, very deep topics. And to just self-appoint yourself as a Tantra teacher is really irresponsible.
Well, you're talking about the importance of lineage there in apprenticeship. And the reason why lineages are lineages is because somebody who's actually kind of learnt themselves through being apprentices themselves can then transmit that information from one generation to the next. And each generation can refine the techniques, refine the level of attunement, which is, I think, what we're seeing in the Tantra world at the moment, and indeed one reason why this whole training that we're doing exists. It's built on the back of all the people that we've learnt from. And I've learnt from some of the best psychotherapists on the planet, in the course of a 30-year career, and some of the best Tantra teachers as well, including yourself, Shashi,
And Margot, who we have here. So there's Margot and Anne.
Margot!
one of my great mentors.
Yeah, indeed.
So yeah,
Indeed. Yeah, yeah.
it's like it's happens when things expand. We saw it in yoga that like it's great that tantra is so popular, but the
Mhm.
downside of that is too many people jumping too quickly thinking that they're ready to facilitate. And like you said, we created a trauma training for tantra professionals. Unfortunately, too many people sort of realize they need it after they've had a negative experience or
Mhm.
an allegation against them, or you know, I think one of the most common things that I hear is, people start facilitating and then there's too much for them to handle in the room. That might be a catharsis happening or a Kundalini energy
Mhm.
experience. Usually it's the big things, but as you mentioned, too often people miss the subtle ones like a freeze response or a dissociation, and
Mhm.
later then they get the feedback from people that they felt traumatized. So whether it's a loud dramatic one or a quiet freeze, things happen in workshops, in tantra workshops, that leave a scar on people rather than helping them to heal and transform. And it's at that point that many tantra teachers realize that they need more training in how to work with trauma.
Mhm. Exactly. In a roughly analogous sense, after I've been practicing yoga for 15 years or thereabouts, I became a psychotherapist for precisely this reason, because I needed to have therapy because I realized that the yoga itself was not doing the trick. I was doing lots of
Mhm.
postures, I was pranayama, meditation. I was energized, very, very energized indeed, far more so probably than I am now, although it's more integrated with me now. But I was very energized in that kind of youthful, springing lamb kind of a way, and it was all going in the wrong way, and I was feeling angry. And I would do like a yoga session. I would be hitting the walls of my room, of my temple, with my fists hard enough to draw blood. And I was wondering why I was doing that, since yoga was all about peace and love and serenity and ananda, bliss. And I got to realize, I had issues, hangover
Yeah,
issues, and then I
yeah,
needed to go in for therapy. In an
yeah.
analogous way, I think a lot of people, we've got an age now where more people understand more about themselves, people's attachment issues, for example. People are much more cognizant of that, and they come into a tantra workshop, or they come in to have some practice, and they're more appraised of all of these things. But still, the appraisal on paper of all of those things is not the same thing as being able to then be activated by the energies that a tantric workshop can bring into the equation, and then channeling those energies into ways that further self-actualize the individual. Instead, they get channeled into the reservoirs, so to speak, of trauma, which
Hmm.
which I think, uh, to the extent that it's unresolved, we need to
Yeah.
be able to identify those things. And that's another thing I think that we identify.
Yeah, I
Margot.
agree. Margot's adding in here. Thank you, Margot. Before teaching
Yeah,
Tantra, people should do 3 years of bioenergetics, that's working with emotions,
absolutely.
encounter, confronting emotions, Hoffman quadrinity process, transcending the patterns received from our parents, yoga, etc. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Margot.
Yeah.
And what Margot's pointing out here is this mixture of more psychotherapeutic work, emotional work, and spiritual work like yoga. And this is also what you were saying, John. And this is something I encountered because I began as a Buddhist and following an enlightenment Advaita Vedanta path. And
Mhm.
what I discovered was sitting on the yoga mat and I am that, I am that, I am that, but then still having like arguments about, basic things with my partner, like not doing the washing up
After
and
the ecstasy, the
realizing
laundry. Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
And realizing that, you can really awaken consciousness to a high level without doing work on your inner child, your childhood patterns, your emotions. It's possible to develop consciousness and leave and bypass your human experience. And again, we come back to this word integration. How do we integrate a path of awakening, yoga, meditation, Buddhism, all these things, enlightenment? How do we integrate that with our personal healing, our inner child, our childhood wounds, emotionality? Ultimately, that's what Neo Tantra is doing. It's bringing both together. And you know, that's why it's such an integrative path. As we keep mentioning integration, I would love it if we can sort of define it and talk about it a little bit. What do we mean? Because you and I are just bouncing this term around, and I really like to make things available for everyone to understand. What do we mean by integration, and why is it so important? Do you want to jump in first, or shall I?
You want me to? Oh, go on, I'll jump in. We're both going to say something very similar because I know we both love Dan Siegel and we've both worked with the guy, right? So Dan Siegel, for those of you who don't know, is the founder of a modality known as interpersonal neurobiology, which is quite a mouthful, but basically he is the nearest you can get to a tantric kind of mentality brought to bear on the whole gamut of neuroscience. So he's a great person to read and to study with. He talks about what's called a river of integration, which is basically a way of put in a very, in a nutshell, living healthily and in an attuned manner to the world. He said that there are two banks to the river that we try to steer away from. One bank is the bank of rigidity. That is to say that when we get traumatized and we want to be more walled off, and this is the kind of the freeze response, it's the closed downness, the dissociation, which can be so easily missed by a less experienced tantric facilitator. When that happens, we're sailing towards the bank of rigidity. We're kind of holding back. We're in survival mode against trauma by rigidifying ourselves, by closing down. But then there's the other bank, which is the bank of chaos. And the bank of chaos is what happens when we're boundaryless, right? Some people are very boundaried. They're very still. They have more of a pre-birth tendency, if you like, a samskara, and a personality structure that is like the Shiva self. It's very calm. It's like the whole ground of being itself, which of course is still and unmoving. And other people are more inclined to be more chaotic, more towards being in their energy. You get a lot of such people in the Tantra world. They love to dance. You know, the Shiva person will like to sit very still in meditation. They go for stillness. And the Shakti people like to get out and dance. They don't like the stillness so much. And it's good to embrace both, of course, and which is what we would teach. But the Shakti people, the chaos, basically, is the other thing that we want to avoid. So we want to avoid an excess of Shiva or Shakti. To live in the world and live in an attuned and aligned way, we sail down the center and we find ways of banking against the currents of the river in order to develop enough resilience, which keeps us in the center of the river. I'll stop there. If you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'd love to add on to it. So yeah, love Dan Siegel as well. So you were talking about the personality types, and I'd like to build on top of that, of course in Tantra, we're teaching practices for both of these. So there's practices of Shakti activation. You mentioned dance. We've got breath work. We've got shaking. We've got Kundalini activation, tantric massage, a lot of these. And then we've got the other river bank, which is mostly about meditation, but we've also got like sensate focus and somatic work and Qigong yoga, things that build more presence, more Shiva. And again, to be in that river of coherence, of integration, we want to integrate these two. The original path of Tantra, of Kashmiri Shaivism, called it Shivapaya and Shaktapaya when we're doing practices of each. Now, here's one of the biggest mistakes I'm seeing happening in modern Tantra. Too many people are focused on the Shaktapaya. It's so exciting to move energy. And especially with less mature like teachers or people that aren't experienced, they're going for the Shakti. There's a very famous training that goes around the world, many people have heard of, that is sort of embracing sexual openness. I've done the training and it was exhausting because there was no Shiva Paya at all. It was just take your clothes off, everybody self-pleasure, everybody this, everybody very sexual, very dramatic, people processing, people going in the middle of the circle, beating cushions, catharsis. It took me 3 weeks to recover energetically. There wasn't any meditation. Now, Osho said, if there's no meditation, it's not Tantra. There is no Tantra without meditation. He's speaking strongly here for the Shivapaya. If we only move Shakti, it isn't Tantra. It could be hedonism. It's dramatic. It causes chaos.
Exactly.
So too many Tantra teachers, they see the Shakti because it's very visible. Oh, we get everyone to shake. We get everyone to take off their clothes. We get everyone to have an orgy, just make an experience happen. And what happens when we have all that Shakti is we have chaos, we have overwhelm, we're re-traumatizing people. People cannot integrate because integration needs the other riverbank. The boring bit, meditation, silence, shavasana, a yoga practice. I actually know so many people who call themselves tantrikas who do not do a daily practice. I do yoga or qigong meditation every single day because I know that I need to build a container for all of this energy I'm activating. Exactly. All of my workshops start with an hour and a half of meditation and morning practice before we start any kind of emotional release, processing, or healing. And this is the biggest mistake I see again and again and again is everybody's pumping out the Shaktapaya, pumping out the catharsis and the drama and feeling like like I said, we're opening people up. But they are doing it in such an irresponsible way because people cannot integrate with just the chaos. They need this Shivapaya. They need the meditation. The meditation part, the Shiva, is where we build a container. The Shakti is the contents. It's all the contents. If the contents are bigger than the container, which they frequently are, then we get overwhelmed. We get re-traumatization. Some people even get traumatized in the Tantra workshop and they were fine when they walked in because they're being subject to too much energy and emotion for the nervous system. So this, I think, in a nutshell, is the biggest sort of issue that I'm seeing again and again is that Tantra teachers, ones that are not trained or they know nothing about trauma or the nervous system, they are focusing way too much on making things happen, on moving energy and moving emotions without the experience of, and it's not just enough to balance them. You need to have the experience of when to bring in the meditation, how to build the energy, when to return to the meditation, how to hold space for the integration. This is what I'd say is missing in so many of the younger, newer, and self-appointed Tantra teachers.
Absolutely. Well said. Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think that, the reason why we get advocates of the cathartic method is it's a hangover from the 60s. From the 50s going back through the generations, people were a lot more reserved. They were a lot more boundaried. And so as a result of that, we needed to help people to de-repress. When the 60s came along, when the Stones started singing They Can't Get No Satisfaction, when I first heard that, boy, I was immediately separated from my parents who thought it was a cacophony of rubbish. No, this is absolutely where it's at. It's de-repression of all of the strictures and the doctrines that have come before it. And Tantra, of course, is transgressive. So you add the idea of transgression, which is misapplied in a lot of ways, certainly from what it's meant in classical Tantra. And then you put that into workshops in the 1960s and 70s, and catharsis is it. It's all about de-repressing everything that's held us back. And that proved to be very useful because most people needed that de-repression. In this day and age, we don't. In this day and age, we come from 30 years of rave culture, of people being able to let it all out. And so now, yes, we get some repressed people. We get a lot of people who are already de-repressed. And then when you
Mhm.
start, as you say, introducing purely activational techniques into a Tantra workshop, then the results can be catastrophic, like you
Mhm.
say, because chaos times 10 is, one cannot actually contain it, and it does
Mm.
need to be contained.
Mhm.
Facilitation requires containment, but
And of course, if a teacher is covering both, if a training covers both sides, then you're taking care of everyone in the room, because there will always be, as you said, personality types. The more like masculine personality types, the rigid, held, contained people, and then the more chaotic, emotional, all over the place, boundaryless people.
yeah,
And then the beauty is, first of all, the facilitator needs to see the differences and know that different participants require different practices, but also knowing that when you're bringing both sides, you're taking care of everybody in the space, which is
yeah,
important. Something I see is that some of the, like you said, these de-repressed or boundaryless people are coming into spaces and then being pushed into even more. And I see a lot of dissociation happening here where, so I want to define this because we brought in a lot of professional terms. Dissociation happens when the consciousness kind of leaves the body and it's no longer grounded in, consciousness isn't grounded in the body. And a huge issue with this is it's often mistaken as being a spiritual. People think, oh, they're having a spiritual experience because their eyes are rolling and their body's shaking, and many people go, oh, their kundalini is awakening and they're connecting to the divine, but they're actually leaving the body. And this is the opposite of integration, because we also need to integrate the body and the consciousness together. We also want to integrate the shadow and the light side of the personality. As facilitators, we need to understand integration on so many levels to really be doing the deeper level of work. To think that teaching Tantra is just giving everyone a strong experience is very, very immature and too simple as a way to think of teaching Tantra. It's irresponsible, and it's also harmful in many cases. So it's so important. I also really want to point out that, like I said at the beginning, many facilitators are well-meaning, but there's often no trauma training included on Tantra teacher trainings. I did 3 different Tantra teacher trainings as well as apprenticing, and I never heard along the way of any the word trauma wasn't even mentioned. I just happened to have studied psychology before that at Oxford, and realized along the way that this needs to be brought in, and that we need to, and also I see that in the collective consciousness, we all probably see that trauma has become more well known in the collective. We've got Gabriel Mate and Bessel van der Kolk and Esther Perel and other big names, Dan Siegel, bringing awareness about trauma more and more. So I also believe, like you mentioned, like different periods of time, there's different zeitgeist, and now is really the time that facilitators need to be trauma informed, because it's otherwise your participants are going to know more about trauma healing than you do. So it's really important that Tantra teachers not only know all the methods of Tantra and the metaphysics and the history of Tantra, the lineage, but that they add on this piece about trauma, not just trauma informed, but really a trauma training that is deep enough to be doing the work that we're doing, working with people's sexuality and intimacy. So should we talk a little bit about that, about like what we've put together?
yeah, sure. I mean, just on the back of what you've said, a lot of the feedback I know that we've got from the first 2 trauma trainings is not so much, hey guys, I've learned a lot about trauma and now I can do things better. It's more like, hey guys, I am transformed. I am personally transformed. I feel different from the inside out to the way that I was, because what the trauma training has given are the keys to being able to manage the space within myself in order to manage the space that I'm holding for other people, something that we've kind of touched on other times. Now, that's the important thing. We have to learn how to put people into what I call our I power. We have to learn to, distinguish between, like you say, a dissociative, ecstatic state and bliss, because they're two
Yes.
different things. Bliss is the integration of the Shiva and the Shakti. Bliss is what
Yes.
happens when you feel alive, quietly alive, without necessarily having to fling it all over the place. Like, you can fling it all over the place. You can get into ecstatic dance and dance. You can be very open, but also you have the capacity to hold that energy within. And I find that the more I hold my body still, the more the energy rises at my central channel, and takes me into those other places. We've
Yes,
got
totally.
Paul is saying something. John, if the different generations have to face different challenges, are you favorable to a tantra specific by age?
I just
Um,
want to add in that it's not just about different generations, but John was talking more, not about
Mindset.
age groups, but about timing. Like, we were talking about how the early days, 60s, 70s, there was a big opening up. There's a zeitgeist that changes. So it's not just about age. It's not about age bracket as much as um, the times that we're in, right?
Mm.
Do you want to say something to this? And then I want to move on.
Yeah, well, you know me, I can go down about 4 different rabbit holes on this one, particularly when you look at spiral dynamics, but I won't do that. Paul, look at spiral dynamics. And if you do, then I am favorable to a tantra that's not exactly specific by age, but by mindset. But I don't really think that that's practicable. I think what we need to do is to learn to hold the space in a way that allows the lowest common denominator within that space to move up and be embraced by the center of gravity of the energetic field, the shamanic field that we're actually holding. That's quite a skill, I think, to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also it's a highly nuanced kind of thing. We can't always get it right. And I think an important thing here is, when we can't always get it right, the important thing is for us facilitators is not to freak out about that, because we won't always get it absolutely pitch perfect, but we will be good enough. Winnicott talked about the good enough mother. The good enough mother is not a perfect mother, but she's good enough. It's never what happens to us when we get traumatized. It's how the trauma is dealt with. We go into that quite a lot in the course, but I'll stop there.
And yeah, I just would like to speak a little into it to Paul as well. That, Paul, I notice, like, if I have a workshop space and it has from 20 to 70 in the room, then I'm feeling that field. I'm just feeling like, what does that field bring? I've also worked with, actually just this week, I've been working on a documentary with 21-year-old guys looking at how to heal masculinity. When I tune into a field that is a particular age bracket, there are, of course, particular challenges that come up there. But it's also the same, like, sometimes I've taught in Japan, in China, in different countries. And so as a facilitator, there's always some unique things. But the deeper point is, if you have the skill set to read the field, to feel the nervous systems of who you're dealing with, you don't need to study 21-year-olds or Japanese women, or you just need to learn how to feel the field through things like chaos and rigidity, nervous systems, read how much safety there is. You need to know different trauma responses in the body, how to see them. So that's one of the first things we do on our training, is we teach facilitators all the different trauma responses that can be there. and not only how to recognize them, but how to treat each one as a facilitator or your assistant team, because different responses require different methods from us as facilitators. And this is beyond age and beyond country. This is pure nervous system awareness. And so if you learn the fundamentals of working with trauma, then you can work with anyone, any age group, any country. You even wouldn't need to speak the language, actually, because it's a body language that we're really, really looking at. We have a few questions here. I'm just going to have a quick look at this, but I also want to keep us on track. But thank you for your questions. I'm reading it out. When you have a feeling a long-term participant is not open to dive into herself at the workshops and tend to fall asleep if laying down, even when it's time to do an activation. Yeah, there are people who, this is called checking out. Let's give it its official term. There are people who check out in a workshop. I think it's really important, Alicia, that we are not coming with our agenda as a facilitator, right? We might think, I want this person to sit up and I want them to get activated, but they're choosing to kind of opt out a little bit. And the thing is, that is their agency, their free will, and their choice to monitor their experience a little bit, you know. It's often their nervous system kind of taking care of themselves. It's like they're sort of saying to themselves, I would get overwhelmed if I fully joined in this workshop, so I'm going to lie in the corner and I'm going to do some deep breathing. That's actually really healthy that they're doing that. And if we're pushy as a facilitator, which I did in my earlier years, like I wanted everyone to have the full-on experience and the activation, and actually then you're taking on too much responsibility for their experience as a facilitator. We're there to offer opportunities for people, but never to push them. So I actually always have a safe space in the room, like a couch kind of corner. And I say to people, if you want to be in the room, but not involved in whatever's going on, you go sit on that couch. That's where you just get to witness. I'm giving them a Shiva place because maybe the Shakti in the room, the emotion and the release is too much. So go sit on that couch and then you can witness, or you can hold space for yourself. An assistant will come and see if you need anything. That's your resource place. And if someone's lying down, they're probably resourcing themselves, whether they know it or not. And that's great. And if we kind of try and move them and wake them up and get them, activated, then we are, sort of violating their free will and their agency. And agency is a very important part of trauma healing. I'll just briefly touch on this. Agency means letting people choose. A lot of people who were abused as children did not have choice. For example, sexual abuse, someone was forced into something, aggression, somebody was shouting at them, domination, they were forced to do things. And so part of their trauma healing is to feel safe to reclaim their power, their voice, their agency. So it's important as a facilitator to understand how to give people choice. Things like saying, everything here is a suggestion. Please listen into your own body and monitor for yourself. Go sit in the corner if it's too much. And things like this. The more we're pushy, everybody has to get up and shake and beat a pillow right now. We are running a very big risk of re-traumatizing people. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to just add to that as well.
Add something, please do.
If somebody is falling asleep in a Tantra workshop, or indeed in a yoga workshop, because I taught yoga for 35 years, and quite often a lot of people in Shavasana would fall asleep, when doing a nidra. Now, when that happens, I tend to go to the person afterwards and ask them what happened, because like Shashi says, sometimes they choose to I'm just going to kind of let go. I don't want to listen to the nidra instructions. That's having their own agency. But sometimes it can be involuntary as well. It's outside the scope of their own agency. And it's for one of two reasons. One is that the person is so tired in that moment that they just need to sleep. Sometimes we can be relaxed enough to realize how tired we are, because when we're on the go all the time, when we're in sympathetic overdrive, when our systems are so activated, we don't actually realize that we're pushing through a barrier of tiredness, and probably taking a lot of that energy out of our deposit account, our yin energy.
Yeah.
And so therefore that needs to be established, whether somebody has just finds themselves going to sleep because, yes, I've had a really tiring week and I need to sleep. The other one is the trauma response. So sleeping is a form of fainting, right? A faint response. We got, flight, fight, freeze, fawn, faint. And the freeze and the faint responses are usually, as Shashi said before, due to the fact that we're being assaulted. Maybe it's a shock trauma. We are being forced to do something against our will. The only thing that we can do is allow it to happen, but go somewhere else. With the freeze response, we're still there, and the energy is held within the pranamaya kosha, within the energy body. So we're kind of, that's the freeze response, and we're cognizant of what's going on, but we can't move, right? So we're in that reenacting a paralysis. The faint response is what happens when our energy manages to move into the astral, into swapna, into sleep. We faint, we kind of go into ourselves so as not to experience the traumatic impact of what we believe might be happening. So if we're lying down and we do fall asleep, it may be a faint response. And it's really important not to talk to somebody while they're in the workshop, but have a word with them afterwards to discover what's actually going on. And if it's a faint response, then maybe it needs to be dealt with in the sessions by the facilitator. More often, take it outside, take it to do some work.
And what's so great about what you just shared there, John, is the importance of not shaming people, because we're here to heal shame.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we don't shame someone for sleeping or something else. Just one last thing on this, because there's more questions and our time is running out.
Oh my goodness.
Is Alicia, that I also want to say that one thing I try to say before the workshop really gets going is I like to teach participants to be aware of the difference between resistance, when the mind is like, I'm not going to go and do this thing, and embodied truth, when the body is saying, oh, I need to go and rest right now. I like to teach that before I start doing any of the Tantra, so that I'm empowering my participants to check in with themselves and feel, am I opting out because I'm in my comfort zone and I don't, and therefore they might at the end of the training feel like, oh, I really wasted that training because I stayed comfortable. Or am I opting out because my body needs the rest? I don't want to be the person telling them. I don't even know. How do I know? But what I do is I empower them to decide for themselves. And I say, I invite you to stalk this one and try and see, when am I in resistance? In which case, let me push myself forward a little and take a risk, because I'm in resistance to my own expansion. And when am I actually resourcing myself? And I really need to step out of the workshop or out of the process to take care of my own needs, because the difference between resistance and resourcing is really, really important. And I want them to get empowered to learn that. Yeah. I'm going to just really keep things moving, John, if that's okay, because I know you're leaving in 7 minutes. And so we have got another question, but I'm going to hold it for now, because I want to make sure by the end of this session that we've really talked about the training on a practical level, because I'm seeing from the questions that we have quite a few experienced facilitators here. And so I just want to speak to those, that for anyone who's watching, who's joining in this and feeling like, oh, maybe this training is for me, I want to just tell you a little bit about this training and how it came to be, and also what's in it. So I think it was about 5 years ago, we started a international Tantra alliance. I was part of founding that with a group of international Tantra teachers, because we felt that the field of Tantra, even though it's such a powerful technique, it's growing so fast that there's also a lot of cowboys out there, like teaching Tantra, and there are lots of allegations and complaints. There are sexual violations. There's a lot happening. So we created a Tantra alliance, and very soon after creating that, we then had something called safe mediation set up, starting to deal with some of the allegations. But we looked at that. I looked at that and I thought, I don't want it to reach the point where people are getting traumatized in their Tantra workshops and then coming for a mediation. How do we prevent that from happening? Because nobody should be getting harmed in a workshop space. So I thought, how do we prevent that harm from happening? One of the most important ways is by having a space where Tantra teachers, body workers, healers, coaches, temple holders can get the training that was probably missing when they learned Tantra or whatever technique, so that they can have the right training in trauma to really empower them to do the best they can. I took then nearly 1 year interviewing different teachers. I asked teachers, what did you wish you knew 10 years ago? What were the mistakes that came? What do you wish you had known? And then I reached out to John very early on, and other people such as Buster Rudvik, who are trained in psychotherapy and trauma. And through my series of interviews, I started to piece together a curriculum of here's what we need. Then John and I started to teach it 3-4 years ago. And it has been a very, very beautiful journey to guide now 100 Tantra teachers around the world through this training program. So that's how this training, which the link is here below, is born. And I want to be very practical and just tell you a little bit about it. It's a 3-month training, but 2 months are the program. And then there's a month for integration, because it's all about integration. And as I mentioned already, we go through like what are the trauma responses and how to work with them. Also, down regulation, which is how to calm the nervous system, and co-regulation. How do we as facilitators or our assistants step in and use their groundedness as a transmission tool to help people to integrate trauma that they're processing in our workshop spaces. So that's the first part. We start looking into things like dissociation, how to recognize it, and we really then get into the nuance of how to activate energy whilst staying grounded, and something called pendulation, which is about flowing between grounded and expanded states in exactly the right tempo that enable our participants to integrate as they go, rather than be blown open and then try and integrate afterwards. We bring in a guest teacher, Giten Tonkov, who founded the BBTRS, the Biodynamic Breathwork for Trauma Facilitators, which is a training very thrilled to have participated in. And he guides live classes using breathwork techniques. So you actually get to facilitate someone over Zoom into activation and resourcing, so that you can see how to really hands-on do activation work in a safe way that enables people to integrate. And you get to receive a session, so you get to feel how that feels. So we go into recognizing the states, learning how to downregulate, learning how to resource, learning how to activate, how to pendulate and titrate, all these big words. You also learn a whole glossary of Tantra terms, which is important. And then we start going into relational trauma, which I found to be very important, because when I first trained in trauma at Oxford, it was so focused on shock trauma, like having a car accident or being raped, which is very important to know how to deal with. But I realized as a Tantra teacher that many people are coming to heal relational trauma. What happened if you had an aggressive father or an absent parent, or you were bullied at school? It's actually a lot of the emotional unsafety that creates relational trauma that people are coming to try and heal in Tantra. Not only are they coming to try and heal it, but they're also going to project it onto you because you're the authority. And so you need, as a facilitator, to be able to see what people are projecting on you so you can stay clear and neutral, and also reparent them, help them to heal their specific emotional unsafety issues without getting entangled with them. So that's a very big part of this work. We get that from there, we naturally step into power dynamics, which John has already mentioned. Many Tantra teachers are not aware of the power they hold and how important it is to know how to right use of power, how to hold power, how to not abuse your power. Many of the allegations of schools and teachers being called out are a misuse of power. They do not understand the power they hold and how to use it in a responsible way. And they are accidentally causing harm, but it's important harm. So we go deeply into power. And after that, nearly there, John, we get into structure, and we look at how do we structure our workshops, our classes, our schools, our professional life in a way that is really trauma proof, because it's not only about how we're teaching and how we're helping people, but also the structure of the school. For example, having one guru on top of a pyramid is a very unsafe structure, especially if there's no feedback loops available. And that's why we see many gurus getting called out, because there's an abuse of power happening in that structure. Whew. All right, that was it. That was a nutshell of what's in this training. John is holding space for people on this training. I'm the main teacher together with John, and John is holding space for group coaching sessions, so that as going through, because as people go through, they come to learn how to be a better teacher, but of course they also start processing trauma they didn't know they had. Okay, John, I know you need to go around now. Is there anything you want to add about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, you've given the curriculum very succinctly, wonderfully. Thank you for that. What I would say is that this training is super comprehensive. Okay, so in my own professional experience, I haven't found a Tantra, well, a trauma training that is actually as broad as this one. You'll find lots of trauma trainings out there in cyberspace, and they are very good ones, but they're not as comprehensive as this one. And this one is also geared specifically to people who are in Tantra, classical or modern Tantra, who want the best possible education and transformative experience in this regard. It's theoretical and it's practical and it's transformative. And I would never put my name to anything that I didn't think was of the highest caliber. And it is. That's not just because I'm on it. There are some world-class teachers on it, and Shashi's on it, and Shashi's great. You all know Shashi. She's just brilliant. And yeah, I'd love to see you there.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, John. Yeah. So we have many amazing teachers. We have Betty Martin in there. We have Buster Radvik. We have David Cates. We have James Stevenson. I'm just trying to think of all the amazing names. We also go into erotic transference and working with sexual abuse. So you're right. It's very, very comprehensive training. So yeah, for anyone that's watching, if you're feeling like, oh, wow, I want to do this training, then you can see here, there's a link, livetantrapro.com. You can reach out, you can have a discovery call, you can find out more. And maybe you just watch this today and you want to integrate from today. And so we welcome that as well. And you can always reach out to us. So you can reach out to us. We have an email, hello@livetantra.com, where you can reach out and connect to us. For now, I'm going to hold the space, hold the container, and wrap up. I want to say thank you so much to you all for all of your questions and participation. There's one I really wanted to answer here about imposter syndrome. So I'll see if I can find a space on social media to do that, because it's a really
Mm.
good question. John and I could talk for a long time about all of this. Perhaps you just want to come join us on the training and have more discussions. Thank you all for your interest and your care in how to be more trauma aware and how to be part of the healing. And thank you, John. I love co-creating with you. I really love it. And I love your way of putting everything together. And yeah, look forward to seeing you all soon.